Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Natural History Society of Jamaica's presentation this evening. Today, we will be having a presentation by Dr. Eric Garraway. And the presentation is titled Jamaica's Giant Swallowtail Butterfly, Myths, Truths, and the Future. We want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us to be a part of this. It was really quite a bit of persons expressed interest in joining, and really we were so happy to see that. So without further ado, let's begin. Our presenter for this evening is Dr. Eric Garraway, no stranger to many of us here. Dr. Garraway has a philosophical doctorate in animal ecology. He recently retired from the University of the West Indies, where for many years he was a lecturer in the Department of Life Sciences. He has a wealth of experience and knowledge, having joined the staff of the university in the 1980s, where he continued his research, branching off into many fields: ecology, conservation biology, insect taxonomy, and even pest management. Dr. Garraway joined the Natural History Society of Jamaica in 1976 and has held many positions within the society: executive member, vice president, and even president. For his service and commitment, he was made an honorary member in 2000. It is no wonder he has been a mentor and certainly even a father figure to many young scientists. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Eric Garraway as he takes us through this evening's topic, Jamaica's Giant Swallowtail Butterfly, Myths, Truths, and the Future.
Hi, good evening, fellow naturalist. This talk, the idea of this talk came about 2 years ago. The idea was to take the society on a trip to the Blue and John Mountains. And I thought, well, why don't I give a talk about the blue swallowtail before that trip? But COVID came along and that trip went on hold. But I still promise, as soon as things open up a little bit, I would take the society, if you would have me, on a trip to the Blue and John Mountains, where we might look at this giant swallowtail butterfly. And right, I'm hoping you all can see my screen. Okay, good. So myths, truths, and the future. And I came up with this title because there are a number of things in the Jamaican space about this butterfly, which I think we need to address. And we're now at a juncture where we need to look forwards and how we're going to actually conserve this butterfly in the future. Things have changed, and we need to have a new look at it. This butterfly is a wonderful thing to see. Once you see it, you never forget it. It's a really wonderful, wonderful butterfly. Before I get into the details about this butterfly, however, I want to shift things around and then do the acknowledgements up front. Normally do the acknowledgements at the end, but I want you to meet the contributors, the persons who have contributed over the years to the study of this butterfly. I got into it because this guy on my screen, John Parnell, walked into my home one Sunday morning. I was there minding my own business. John showed up and says, "Hey, I'm going off to the Jonco Mountains. I'm going up to Rio Grande Valley to do a film on this giant swallowtail butterfly." And I thought, wow, that sounds interesting. He says, "I need a still photographer. I'll be behind the video camera. I need a still photographer." Well, at that time, I was a member of UWI Camera Club and pretended I knew a bit about photography, you see. And John thought, well, why don't I take this guy along? So off we went. And here we are. We slept in this minibus for I don't know how many weeks. You sort of slept cooped up in this thing with the rain pouring outside, and you have to close the window because it's you can't get wet. You don't have an AC, and trust me, it wasn't fun. When we get up in the morning and you can see us here, we have our clothes on top of the van drying and our nets drying. We do all this sort of thing every morning before we head out. In those days, the cameras were huge. We had to employ one guy to carry the camera, and next guy to carry the batteries, that sort of thing. And this is one of the guys from Millbank, Georgie, who helped us along. In the background, you can see sticking out, just head sticking over the camera is Orlando, who I'll mention, who I'll talk about later. And here we are, 10 days later, we finally saw our very first humerus. 10 days, took us 10 days to see the first one. We have, that looks like young Garraway to the right. Next guy is a Peace Corps whose name I can't remember. He was then with NEPA. Is Georgie, John Panel behind the camera, and Orlando Wilson with the net in the far left. So I came back and I'm talking to Carl Aiken, who, we're all photographers together, and telling him about this exercise. Carl Aiken was then vice president of the society. And before I knew what happened, Carl had this poster advertising that some guy called Dr. Eric Garraway, who has become suddenly an expert on the giants, Jamaica's giant swallowtail, will be making a presentation. Later on, I was joined by a little dynamo of a lady called Odette Bailey. She stayed with me in that project for many years, went on and do a PhD on this butterfly. Her contribution was significant. And I wanted to meet the guy on the right here, a guy called Errol Francis. He started as a field guide, but he quickly became, well, I have him here as a field assistant. He probably should have called him a research assistant. Brilliant, brilliant guy. And I often wondered, had he had the opportunity to go to university, what contributions he'd have made to science. And he took care of us in all sorts of different ways. He took us up to dark places like Brookfoot River and had us, up slippery rocks. And you can see Odette being pulled up here of some slippery rocks using some vines that he somehow managed to conquer. Professor Tom Emmel, University of Florida, he was studying another giant butterfly, Papilla crescentis in Florida, and he joined me. We sort of, had a partnership. He working in Florida, I'm working in Jamaica on two large butterflies. Tom Turner was there before me. He left in the mid-80s, and he was working on his real original butterfly man. And if you haven't bought his book, Discovering Jamaica and His Butterflies, you should go out and get one. It's an excellent book. You ought to get a copy. Members of the Natural History Society have been involved for years. In the old natural history notes, going back to the 40s, the writings by C.B. Lewis, Tom Farr, Lily Perkins, and Audrey Wiles wrote on this butterfly. And the painting you see to the right was one done by Audrey Wiles many, many decades ago. Audrey, of course, was an honorary member. Tom Farr was an honorary member, and so too was C.B. Lewis, honorary members of the society. So those are the persons who made contributions to what I'm going to present this evening. The beginnings. The first records we have of Homerus is about in the 1700s. We have no records of how the indigenous population view Homerus. We have no records of that. So our first records begin in the 1700s. And Henry Simmer, he spent a lot of money. Henry Simmer, right? He spent a lot of money paying people to bring butterflies, bring insects back as they went around the world. Europe had discovered the tropics, and they discovered the tropics was full of all sorts of wonderful things. And these very rich men who had made lots of money, mainly through plantations in the colonies, would actually pay people to bring back butterflies and any insect they could. And they'll create paintings, or they'll employ people to create paintings. And here is a paintings of several butterflies. Historians just says from the Neotropics, one from Asia, one from India and Sri Lanka, and the Papilio humerus from America. He didn't even know the exact countries, but he got these specimens and he painted them. Dory, he also did a lot of that. He actually paid 6 times for an insect to any guy in a merchant ship who traveled and brought back insects. And they would illustrate them. But the really big breakthrough came when Williams Jones painted this butterfly. And Fabricius is a name who you would meet if you're a biologist. Fabricius in 1763 described this butterfly from paintings made by William Jones. These are the original William Jones paint, or sorry, these are copies, I should say, of William Jones paintings used in the original description of the species. And this is actually the text that he wrote. And I tried to translate it from Latin, didn't get very far. Reached out to Klaus Wolff, who many of us would remember as an active member of society, and he reached out to all the different persons he could find to translate this old-time Latin text into modern-day Latin and then into English. We got some bits and pieces, but at the bottom says treat it with caution. So the guys are saying, listen, this is as far as we got. Let's take time. But this is original description. Very, very simple. No details. Very, very simple. But enough to name it a species. And he called it Papilio humerus. I want to just do a little bit on biological nomenclature. It's the teacher in me. I have to do a little bit on this. How do animals and plants get their names? There's a generic name, the genus, which is like your family name, and the species, which is the individual name. And when the species is described, you have to say, you need to give the reason for choosing that name. The etymology, that is the reasons behind his name, is a necessary part of the nomenclature. I want to point out something. We often hear people say a species described after. So if something is described after John Brown, really and truly, it really should say the species described for. For means in honor of. After suggests that it carries the person's traits. It doesn't always do that. It might, but it might not. And for example, we named a moth for Thomas Farr in honor of his work he did. You know, it wasn't after, it was for Thomas Farr. So back to humerus. Why was it called Papilio humerus? Let's look at that. Let's deal with the humerus part first. It was named for a Grecian poet, Homer. And those of us who read the classics remember Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. These are classics. And if you haven't read the Iliad, you probably would have seen the blockbuster movie Troy, starring Brad Pitt and Eric Bana. You guys will probably remember that. And if you don't remember that, you remember the idea of a Trojan horse. And many of us that have been hit by the Trojan computer virus, which sneaks in, pretending to be one thing, and then becomes something else. All this comes from Homer. And of course, Achilles' heel and Achilles, all this is a hand down from Homer's poet. So Fabricius says, this butterfly is the most magnificent butterfly I have seen. It's the most majestic butterfly, and I'm going to name it for the greatest poet, Homer. So it's actually named for Homer. Anna Mary Hendricks, a longtime member of society, says we should not be saying Homer. He says she says, think of it. He says Homeric times, Homeric poet. So she says we probably should be saying Homerus rather than Homerus. And she's probably correct, but that's another matter. Papilio once was all butterflies or all papilios. Then all swallowtails became papilios. Then we started to break it up into all sorts of different things. For example, the blue swallowtail has gone through many different genera: Papilio, Graphium, Euretides, Protographium. I don't even know where it is now. In 1983, Hancock created the genus Pteroras. He separated it from Papilio based on number of characteristics, like the expanded tail, some of the larval characteristics. And in 1994, we eventually changed from Papilio homerus to Pteroras homerus. So that's the new name. What would happen 10 years from now? I don't know. But right now, it's no longer Papilio, it is now Pteroras. It is the only Pteroras on Jamaica. It's the only Pteroras, only member of that genus in the Caribbean. Its nearest relative is in Mexico and Panama, a 4-inch swallowtail in Mexico and Panama. Don't ask me how homerus get here. I don't know, but it's here. And it's one of the nice questions one might like to try and answer. I want to turn now to some Jamaican issues. The Jamaican names, what do we call it? We say the swallowtail butterfly. The swallowtail butterfly, that's a common nomenclature in Jamaica. Well, Jamaica has several swallowtail butterflies. On your screen here, all these are swallowtails. And there are even more. There are more swallowtails. So when you say the swallowtail butterfly, we have a problem. Exactly what are we talking about? And this has led to problems in terms of conservation, because everyone thinks every swallowtail they see is Tomerus. And I've been in conferences and I've been challenged when someone says, hey, I see this butterfly in my backyard in Portland all the time. And I'm trying to explain that's not Homerus, but they insist. And it creates a wrong impression of what the concept of endangered is about. Because they see the swallowtail, and I see it in my yard on a regular basis. I do not really understand what this thing of being endangered is actually speaking to. That's one problem here. The giant swallowtail butterfly then. So I thought, let's go on Google and have a look. And I put in, giant swallowtail butterflies. And I got the first page. And hey, there's no Homerus on page 1. Let's try page 2. There's still no Homerus. Page 3, finally, I got Homerus. So it's saying to us, just saying the giant swallowtail butterfly doesn't really work either. So one might say instead, Jamaica's giant swallowtail, Jamaican would work, Homerus swallowtail, or simply Homerus. I think all of these are names which can be used, but not the other two, which is in common. These two are in common usage. The next common thing we have that Homerus is the second largest butterfly in the world. It's a big guy. I mean, that's a 6-inch ruler you're talking about there. That's not a small butterfly. It's a big thing. But guess what? Second largest, that's a myth. And, we think it comes from a statement which was made in a video, which says Homerus is second only to the bird wings. And someone translated the term bird wings to mean just one particular species, not understanding that bird wings is a huge group of butterflies. So that one bad translation, which says the original statement was, it's second only to the bird wings. But the translation was that whoever translated it treated the bird wings as just one species. In fact, there are at least 36 species of bird wings. There are whole books on the bird wings. And these are, you can see here some photographs of the bird wings. So let's look at the largest butterflies in the world and see where Homerus fits. All right, let's have a look. First one, largest one, Queen Alexandra's bird wing, 11 inches. Number 2, Goliath, 10 to 11. Number 3, African giant, 9.1, 4, 5, 6. There's still no Homerus. I jumped to 9. There's still no Homerus. Bang, bingo. We are coming at number 10. So the idea that we have the second largest butterfly in the world is a myth. And I've superimposed Homerus on Queen Alexandra's bird ring to give an idea the relative size. These things are called bird wings because when Europeans showed up in places like Papua New Guinea and they saw these things flying in the canopy, they pulled out their shotgun, went bang, 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 thinking birds were going to come down, and they couldn't believe it. What came down instead were butterflies. So they're called bird wings. Okay? We often say that it's the largest butterfly in the Western Hemisphere. Oh, that's debatable because there are different definitions of the Western Hemisphere. Some persons define Western Hemisphere as the Americas. Others say, but the hemisphere is half of the Earth. So it can't be just the Americas. And therefore, if you were to look at this map, they're using the meridian of Greenwich as that cutting point. And in that case, parts of Africa would be in the Western Hemisphere. And as we saw, there's some pretty big butterflies there. So it's probably safer to say it's the largest in the Americas. Then you're pretty safe ground. You know, you can't go wrong with that. Okay? You can't go wrong with that. We once had a thing which was Homerus was fairly common, but numbers have dwindled now. In reality, Homerus was never really common. It never existed in large numbers. It was always very highly sought after because it was in very, very low numbers. We go back to the writings of Edith Blake, was wife of Governor Blake back in late 1800s. And while he was busily doing governor things, she was busily, occupying herself chasing butterflies and things like that, and painting these wonderful things and making wonderful notes. Even then, Homerus was rare. All the records we could find, it has never really been a very, very common butterfly. It has been restricted to the cockpit country and the region of the Blue and Jonco Mountains. The idea of a mid-island population among Mount Diablo has not been confirmed by any rare writings. But Homerus is a giant. And I've put it here. In the middle is one of these common white butterflies, like sort of size you see flying around your lignum vitae plants today. So you can get an idea that Homerus is indeed a giant. And at lower right is the smallest butterfly, the pygmy blue, tucked in on the tail to give an idea the size of the smallest relative to Homerus and the Queen Alexandria bird. It is a giant, guys. And being a giant has implications. Think of it, all the giants, the giant whales, the giant elephants, all of these giants, they are struggling to survive. And Homerus is in that league. Giants have large body size. They have a long lifespan, but guess what? Relatively low numbers and low rates of reproduction. The giant trees, they take hundreds and hundreds of years, but they reproduce very, very slowly. So let's look at some comparisons let's do a bit of biology here. Let's take the mammals. Take mice versus an elephant. The mice live a couple of weeks. Elephants go 90 years and more, probably. But look at the bottom table. The mice is a tiny thing. But we have billions and billions of them. Elephants, huge, but they're struggling to survive. Same thing with butterflies. That white butterfly lives for lives about a month. Homerus goes on to 5 months probably. And the biggest one to 8 months. But guess what? These two big ones, Queen Alexandra birdwing and Homerus, they are in trouble. They reproduce very slowly. They produce few offsprings. Asia produces so many offsprings that it is a pest. It's a pest of cabbage and the crucifers because it reproduces so fast. So we have on one side the smaller things being pests and the big ones struggling for survival. We have to bear this in mind when we're working with Homerus. It is a giant, and that puts it in a special category of animals. Right? It is a giant. A little bit about the life cycle, not a lot. The larvae feeds on just two plants, one in the west and one in the east. And here's a female ovipositor. These are the only two plants of two species of Hollandia. Both plants are interestingly endemic. One endemic to the west, one endemic to the east, both endemic to Jamaica, being fed upon by an endemic butterfly. An interesting scenario. The eggs tend to be laid singly. They don't lay many eggs like many butterflies would lay 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 eggs in one go. One egg at a time in this case, one egg at a time. And it goes through a series of larval stage. Larva 1, third, pupae, then adult. Okay? The larvae are interesting. They have these wonderful, big eyes and big mouths and so on, which would scare off any predator, any lizard or anything like that. The truth is, the head is tucked away underneath there. It's a little head underneath there. All these are markings that protects it. And here we can see the head is tucked away underneath here. And if the markings don't work and you trouble it, it would stick out these two fangs as though it was a snake. And that's some of the things it used to protect itself. But let's talk about conservation. When we started in 1980s, there were some big questions. Why was Homerus endangered? And there are lots of theories. Shortage of larval food plant, shortage of primary forest, small populations leading to genetic problems, and of course, collection and sale of specimens. And let's look at each of these. When we got out there, remember we have only 2 larval food plants, right? We started working on the eastern population. What did we find? That the plants were not rare. And the idea, because there was a movement at the time to even protect the food plant as well as the butterfly, the food plant was not rare at all. It was all over the place. It was dispersed by bats. The bats loved it. They would chew the outside off and dump the seeds. And the seeds would be dumped by the bats and transported by water. And the seeds were basically unharmed by the bats. And it's a really good dispersal of these seeds. So they were everywhere. And Luke et al. Wrote an interesting paper on the impact of hurricanes. And in that, they pointed out Hornandia was a rather strange plant in that it's able to survive in open areas as well as under dense canopy. And in fact, the leaf structure looks very different. One is broad and juicy and one is small and compact. So the plant can survive all sorts of conditions. So there wasn't a shortage of larval food plant. Question number 2, was there a shortage of primary forest? The implications here is that what's being implied here, that the butterfly depends on primary forest. But when we got there, Homerus was not just in primary forest, it was in secondary forest. It was even in occasionally in people's farms and, once in a while in someone's backyard if you live close to the forest. So there wasn't a shortage of primary forest. What we found was more important, moist forest was essential. You need regular rainfall, high humidity. We found many areas like the Spanish River or like Dolphin Head Mountains, which had Hernandia, but no humerus because they had an extensive dry season. So you need regular rainfall and regularly high humidity. That's what mattered. And if the animals didn't get that water, it ended up with problems later on. And in this video, the larvae actually drinks up a drop of water after the rain. There's a drop of water right there, and it's going to slide down. Right there it goes, and the larvae is going to just drink that water up. Like it's going to drink that water up, because if it doesn't get enough water, when it attempts to come out of the pupae, it would not have enough fluid to stretch out these large wings. What we see here is a butterfly having emerged from the pupae and stretching the wings. If it doesn't have enough liquid, it can't go beyond something like this. It remains all crinkled up. If it's got enough liquid, it can stretch the wings all the way out. Water, regular rainfall, high humidity, crucial. Next question. What are genetic problems associated with small populations? And there are several issues which can arise if you have a small population. One was the problem of sex ratios. When we look at museum collections, we found that there's a huge number of males relative to females. In fact, we did a survey asking museums around the world to send me data on their specimens, and there were 10 males to every 1 female. Now that's a problem. The other way around might work, but 10 to 1 male to female, that's not going to work. When we collected in the field, we got 4 to 1. When we read in the lab from larvae, we got pretty close to 1 to 1. What was really happening was that males tend to establish territories and are therefore easily to catch. So the skewed sex ratio was really an artifact of the catchability of the males, and there wasn't really a sex ratio problem. But there might be other genetic problems. And we thought, why don't we look at it? Now we have all this modern technology. So we said, let's look at the genetics of the 2 populations, see if the individuals have high diversity or whether they have very low diversity within the population. Is the Western population different from the East? We don't know these things. Some persons think they have been isolated so long that they have 2 separate species or 2 subspecies. So we launched the Homerus Genetic Project in 2018. John Pannell came back. He is now about 85 or 86. He rejoined me, believe it or not. We had a team of graduate students. Actually, John spoke to the Natural History Society in 2018 when he visited. Some of us might remember that. And there he is, doing the long wait, snoozing off. And then when someone shouted Homerus, you spring into action. You would not believe he was 80. You spring into action thinking he was 18. Literally just transformation. And we collected these specimens, clip off a little bit of the wing, just a little bit of the tail. These are some of the undergrads and the graduate student Damien here. And then we let them go. Take a little bit off. It doesn't harm them. If you look at bottom right, you can see a specimen. It's all battered and so on, but it's still doing very well. So we take a little piece off, didn't change anything. This is the cockpit country, and there is Damien. He was a major collector. He netted most of our animals for us doing that exercise. We collected 15 wing samples in the east, 2 wing samples in the west. These are now stored at UWI at very low temperatures. Then COVID came through and the project got delayed. We were hoping to be back out there in this year. We don't know yet. The year is not finished. We still hope we can complete it in 2022. Meanwhile, John made a video which is online. And I think if you find time, please look at it. You'll find it very interesting. So the genetic issues are still unresolved. And when we get it resolved, we will come back and share it with you. Okay? Promise you that. What about the collectors? How much impact was there versus collecting and selling? Let's face it. If we have a small population, any loss matters. Any loss matters. Luckily for us, most of what they collected were males. That's sheer luck. But any loss matters. 1984, we've had a situation where there were well-established butterfly collectors in the East. We had no laws protecting the species. They were free to do this. We couldn't stop them. There was one guy in Bath who was known as Chinese Man. I never met this guy, but I was told he was a very good collector and he will go to places like Cornbus Gap for like a week on end. In Millbank, it was Orlando Wilson who was the butterfly man over there. And that's Orlando here to the right. That's a picture of Orlando. And we kind of adopted each other. We sort of fused, had a partnership as my team or John's team then and Orlando. And over the years, we engaged him as a field guide. We said, how do we reduce his impact by collecting, in terms of collecting of butterflies? At this stage, he's collecting mainly damaged specimens, and he gets like $50 US for a specimen. But that still makes him fairly wealthy within the context. He's still getting more money than the average person. He collected, and he would send these specimens across to a contact he had in the US. They had sent him nets and various collecting equipment, and he made about $50 US per specimen. Meanwhile, specimens are being sold for $2,000 to $3,000 in the US, but he gets $50, you say. So we thought to ourselves, how do we change this thing? We said to ourselves, let's teach Orlando how to rear specimens. And if he gets perfect specimens, he can now demand a much better money, much better, much better dollars for his specimens, and he will collect much fewer. So we taught him how to rear, and he would sell perfect specimens. Now he got $300 for male, $300 for $500 for female, and he collected much fewer specimens, and he was happy. And we thought we had something going. Then we thought, why don't we start thinking of a butterfly farming business? Not necessarily humerus, but probably other butterflies. So we arranged and we financed from top to bottom Orlando's visit to the University of Florida. And then he's going to go on to some other butterfly houses, learn how to do butterfly farming, then come back to Jamaica, and we would start a butterfly farm in the valley. After 2 weeks, Orlando vanished. He just disappeared. It was a big blow because we had invested so much in this guy. He was really sharp, he was good, and we had big hopes. We never got back to this program for a long time, mainly because we could not go back to the US Embassy to try and send someone off in the same program. They're going to ask you, hey, what happened to your first guy? We can't find him, you can't find him. Why should we allow another one to go? So we ran into a dead end. That was really a big, big blow. We launched a big campaign, seminars, field trips, using the videos and slides, etc. And many NGOs came on board, Geographical Society, UWI, and, of course, NHSJ. And we campaigned. And by the end of the 80s into the 90s, things started to change, guys. We now begin to have legislation which give us some teeth. So in 1988, humerus was gazetted as a protected species. Then came the system of protected areas, which protected the habitat. or some of the habitats, not all, some of it. Then NEPA was, NEPA was created and RCSR was created. So we now have a whole cadre of things happening. That made a big difference. We had a new question on the table. What were the factors causing low numbers? What are the, in terms of ecology, what were the mortality factors affecting homeras? And we worked mainly on the East. Think of it this way. Large number of eggs laid, that's classic in most species, but the number of individuals decrease as you go from egg to larvae to pupae. By the time you get to the adults, only a few survive. That's not unusual, but we didn't know what are the factors causing this. We found there are some bacteria, birds, ants, and some parasitic wasps, some little tiny things. Here we can see ants attacking an egg. And in this pupa, that black spot you see there, that's oozing black smelly stuff, a result of bacterial decay on the inside. But these were the wasps that are creating the big problems. Tiny things. They could lay 20 eggs in one humerus egg. Top is the larvae, bottom is the pupae. As many as 20 of these wasps in one humerus egg. And they were destructive. Importantly, in the undisturbed habitat, they would kill about 47% of the eggs. In the disturbed habitats, these parasites would kill 90% of the eggs. Now, if you lose 90% of eggs, 90% of the population as eggs to one mortality factor, then put on ants, then put on fungi, then put on birds, then you go to the larvae and you lose some in the larvae and you lose some pupae, what's left? We have a problem. And the problem gets even bigger. Homerus laid much more eggs in the disturbed habitats, 3-to-1 ratio. Right? The adults like open areas. In natural forests, they still go for the clearings created where the tree falls. In natural forests, they patrol along rivers and streams. Because with those large wings, you have a problem flying through dense vegetation. So they naturally gravitate towards the clearings. Now let's work this thing through and work with me here. Work with me. We have up here undisturbed habitat. Nice, good forest. It might be secondary forest, might not be primary, but good forest. 53% of the eggs would survive, and the adults would fly on and go to other undisturbed habitats. Fairly good survival, and the population will continue. Switch over to the next slide now. This time, large numbers of females are heading to the disturbed habitats. Only 10% of the eggs survive. Then all the other mortality factors, we're lucky if anything else go back. In effect, we have what is called in ecology a source which is producing butterflies, and the disturbed habitat is a sink which is simply sucking in adults but not giving anything back. So we have pictured here again, nice habitat, rivers, and can patrol up and down quite happily. And then it goes down into these sinks and nothing comes back. And in fact, I once saw a document which suggested that we should start clearing some areas in the forest because someone said, I see more homerus in the clearings than in the forest. So let us make clearings so we can get more homerus. But of course, that's what would happen. All right. And this was a recommendation to NEPA. Luckily, NEPA didn't pick it up. NEPA thought, just like me, it was a load of not too good ideas. Right. Let's leave it. Let's put it that way. Guys, the balance between the two types of habitats might be the most crucial factor in the survival of the species. The balance between the disturbed and the undisturbed. If we continue the disturbance, sooner or later, it's going to flip, where everything going to go down that sink and nothing is going to come out. We don't know what's happening in the east. We haven't looked at it yet, guys. We don't know what's, sorry, that's in the east. We don't know what's happening in the west as yet. We haven't looked at the west yet. I want to switch a little bit. Homerus in the Jamaican social space. By the 1980s, Homerus became a flagship species for conservation. You know, really big. And it hasn't been declared a national butterfly, you know, but we all treat it as such. You know, here it is, we treat it as such. You know, it's even on the Manly. You know, there it is on the Manly. And on Miss World, you know, it's treated as such, but we haven't yet declared it. We have made some big steps in the conservation, but we still have some issues to solve. And I want us to just look at these quickly. Let's look first at the Western population. That's the one in the cockpit country. We know very little about it. There's been no intensive study. The cockpit country is huge, you know, guys. It's huge. And we have only operated a bit on the periphery and one or two roads that go across. There are a couple of pathways, Troy to Windsor, etc. We don't know a lot about it. But these are the sites where we have recorded this butterfly over the many years. But there are huge areas inside here which we haven't gone. We don't know what's going on in there. This guy, Matthew Leonard, wrote a paper in 2007. I want to look at it because it has some significant things in it. He said in the cockpit country in 2000, not in 4, that should be 2004, he estimated that the population in 2004 happened to be 50 individuals. I put it down as gross underestimation. And I want you have to work with me again on this one. The way Homerus works is that, think of it this way, the habitat is fragmented into blocks, sections, how you want to think of it. Each valley is a block, each valley is a section, each hilltop is a block, right? Think of the landscape in fragments. And the state of each block changes with time. It goes from favorable, and you see lots of butterflies, to unfavorable, no butterflies. And it's changing from month to month, from season to season. So you go to one place now, lots of butterflies. You go back tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but you know, a couple of months down the road, and there's nothing in sight. So distribution of Homerus is constantly changing. I've diagrammed it here. Some areas have Homerus, some are empty. Come back 3 months' time, you know, they're constantly changing. In January, this is what it looks like. Comes back in March, it looks different. Now, this chap came down and he studied a population. I took him to a place called Niagara, where I know there was an active population at that time. And he did a study in this little corner here. I took him once to Cook's Bottom, but he never seen the rest of the cockpit country. He really worked here. And he worked in July, August 2004, captured 18 Homerus and measured and did all sorts of things. Came back in December to January. There was nothing in sight. Was that not surprising? Because we just established what? That the population is changing with time in terms of its distribution. What does Mr. Leonard do? He omits the data where he found nothing. So he did his work. He totally omits the data from December, January. He found nothing at all. And he decided by some strange thing that Niagara was equivalent to the entire cockpit country. And came up with 50 individuals in the entire cockpit country. The problem here that others persons might read this and take it as though it's a fact. That's the danger here. That's the danger. That's the problem we have. And we have to be very careful because persons sometimes zip in and zip out and make big statements which are really not grounded. Anyway, the cockpit country, I put it here, is a sort of self-protecting landscape. It's just difficult to work in. And most human work is on the periphery. What's the big danger? Bauxite mining. We all know that. We had the prime minister in parliament showing off his map and making big pronouncements. And then not long after, we heard about mining in the cockpit country. And we know the stories. That's where the government has designated. And the conservationists are saying, all that green area should be included. And this area here is the area that had been designated for mining is now on hold. And remember the great big protest. And I love this one. Every hillock matters. I love that one. And there's lots of protest. And Homeras featured big again. Here comes Homeras as another flagship again. It becomes flew each time as a flagship. But guess what? Counter protest. We want work. We want to get into the cockpit country. We want mining, guys. What are we up against? The Jamaican economy is under pressure. There are few options existing. This is real. This is what we are up against. This is real. This is not imagined. And there's danger of constantly, slowly chipping away at that habitat. That's what we're up against, and it's real. We can't forget it. Eastern population, then. Garrow and Bailey, as Other Bailey and myself, we established a field station in the 1990s. We were embedded in the community. We spent a lot of time with the people there. We conducted, sort of community-based environmental program. We were joined by park rangers. This photograph is not from Rio Grande. This photograph is actually from the Blue Mountains, but I thought I'll stick it in there. There was an active set of park rangers, people like Poise and these guys, and we were all embedded in that community. And these guys found ways of slipping in environmental conversations in the middle of a domino game. And you talk about environment, you go across to the noisy shop and you talk to the young guys and you buy a red stripe. Then you go over to the liquor rub shop and you philosophize with the elders. Then you went to church to meet Sister Mary. But we were embedded and people learned to trust you and listen to you. Then the park came on stream again, not only with rangers, but a big education program funded by the Rare Center for Tropical Conservation. All this happened into the 90s, 80s into the 90s. And the community emerged as a protector of this butterfly. The community members said no to poaching. Then the system of farming became environmentally friendly. And there's even a movement that says, don't cut the water hole. Don't cut the Hernandia. If it's on your farm, you leave it. Several things happened. There's the formation of a farmers association. And they did not just farm. Environmental management became one of the key things. And they planted acres and acres of forest. And they went to, and they did lots of reforestation programs. And they used seedlings from the forest. And they're very, very active. They went into ecotourism. They managed the trails in the Blonjonka Mountain National Park, the Kuna Pass Trail, the Cornpus Gap Trail. They managed these hiking trails. They established, these all these trails, some of them very historic. The guys were well trained, certified by TPDCO. And this is a Natural Society trip. We had Hayfield heading over across the Kuna Pass. This is where I was hoping we would have gone. last year along this trail. You notice the trails are well maintained. It's well maintained then by the Bowden Pen Farmers Association. Well maintained. And at the end of it, there was good country food waiting. Right? Good country food waiting at the end. This is at Ambassador. It's a wonderful eco lodge. And we took students there because it offered the opportunity to educate them in all sorts of environmental matters. And of course, having been working all day, you run into a stream, you can't resist, you simply jump in all your clothing. And importantly, we had a round table. So on this side is mainly students, over here, people from the community. And we had these round tables at night where we sat in and exchanged ideas about all sorts of things. Has all of this borne any fruit? Has it done anything really? Where are we today? We have not conducted any scientific assessment in recent times to say what has happened to the population. We need a parallel study to the 1990s. But I can tell you that the community had become very, very active in the conservation of the species. And the idea of community conservation is a new buzzword out there. There are a lot of whether it can work and whether it can't work. Guys, I wrote a paper not so long ago, published internationally, saying it can work. Community education is hard work. But you have to be embedded in that community. You see, conservationists come and go, you know, we make one-day trips, we make speeches, and then we go. Or we might last a couple of months and then we disappear, but the community remains. We flash through. Some of us just peep in and we're gone. Community conservation work if persons are embedded in the community for a long time. When we had the rangers there, we were Grande Field Station there, we were embedded. And as a result, some years ago, I went back to Millbank after being out absent in a big way for some time, pulled out my net, and two little kids came out of the river. Three young girls came out of the river and threatened to call the police to arrest me because I was going to capture the butterfly. This was the high point of my life as a conservation biologist. The message had come down the generations, guys. These are two little picnics who want to arrest a big old man like me. The message had come down the generations. This is a conservation biologist's dream. Many community members says there's increased sightings of Homerus. People like Worries, who was president of the association. And I trust these guys. These guys live there. They know the names and the name of stones and everything, you know. They understand and they have very sharp eyes. And if they say that, I believe them. And in 2018, while we're doing that genetic project, we saw 35, at least 35 adults in one day. Oh, that's crazy. We probably saw more Homerus than any other butterfly. If this was your first visit, you would not think this thing was endangered. It was everywhere. And look at this leaf below. There are how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eggs, and another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 old eggshells. A lot of activity. This is just a snapshot. But in all my years, I've never come close to even seeing double figures in one day. Never seen double figures in one day. And here am I looking at over 35. Don't know what it means, but probably what these guys are saying is true. But we need to go and find out. Things look good, ain't it? But there's some problems. Some big problems. What we see here is part of what used to be the infrastructure in one of the trails. This used to be one of the huts so you can shelter in and sit and have a dinner, have a lunch and so on. That's all. It's all coming apart. What has changed? Loss of leadership. The problem with lands for farming. And there's general economic slowdown in the country. And we have a new generation with new perspectives. Just look at it. Present situation now. The Farmers Association is collapsing or has collapsed. That's another matter by itself. Ambassador Cabins is in sort of limbo. The trails are not being maintained the way they used to be because the Farmers Association is not there. Forestry has started reforestation program and is taking back land utilized by some of these farmers for generation. And there's no clear economic pathway. So people begin to have fortune again. And we have no education program. So let's look at the communities we're looking at. Millbank, Comfort Castle, Ginger House. They're all farming communities. They farm, they harvest stuff from the forest, but things are rough. Because they don't get up and protest like lots of other communities, they're often forgotten. I refer to them, these rural communities, as forgotten people. Governments don't remember them because they're not on the scale. If here's an example, you look at your television tonight and there's a news and they want to pull a shot of the public. You know, they're making a bit of news about something to do with Jamaican people. Look at the shots of the public. They're all Harvard and Crossroads or something. Country people doesn't never seen on these things. Country people don't exist. You look at your television clippings. It's always some one of the developed areas, and that's how the government treat them. You know, and you get all sorts of variations, of course, in these communities. And they do a lot of self-help. If they don't do this, I don't know how they will manage. The community has given us a lot. They have given up a lot in terms of conservation. But the balance isn't there. Conservation involves sustainable development. This is a term which we coined. We environmentalists invented this term. But we pay little attention to the development part of it. We chase the species. We're chasing butterflies and birds and all sorts of things. And we forget that we coined this thing called conservation development. We need a sustainable education program. We need to rationalize the lands. People exist. People have to feed themselves. If you're going to take away the lands, we need to somehow find a way for people to survive. We cannot behave as though they do not exist. Forest matters, but guess what? People also matters. Our education program went off the boil many years ago. Once is not enough, you know. You have a new generation. You see, when we had a program in the 1990s, we were fighting one set of things. That education program has changed things. So we have a new paradigm. We need a new program to deal with the new changes. Once is not enough. The lands which farmers used to use, forestry is now taking it back. There are land up there which belong to some people, but there's no infrastructure to get to this land. The land is just up there. How do you get to it? You got to fly in. So we give them land, but we don't give them any infrastructure. It's kind of cute, isn't it? Agro-processing. We've been talking about agro-processing for a long, long, long time. Tourism for a very long time. But there's a number of things you have to remember. Small communities have small number of individuals that can play different roles. And very often we don't have the manpower to pull off all of these big ideas. Very often there aren't enough leaders to pull off the big ideas. especially since they have to keep migrating to Kingston in order to get a job anyway. So we've talked about breadfruit project. I got funding for a breadfruit project some time ago that fell through. That's another story. I can tell you about it in the discussion if you're interested. A fruit processing project has been on the table for years. It's still coming. No one knows when it's going to reach. The equipment on the ground, all sorts of things happening. We don't know when it's going to happen. We really need leadership to help with these things. Ecotourism, enough promise, enough preparation, one or two local tourists and one or two visiting from abroad. Never economical. Ambassador and the shows have never been self-sustaining. They've always depended on projects to make them work. What has happened to ecotourism? A few guides got some money. It's important for the communities, though. They can come together around various projects. And that's really important. It gives the society a sense of importance. Although they didn't make a lot of money, it was important. But ecotourism has never made money in Jamaica. Only big ecotourism projects, Crystal Springs have gone, Maya Lodge have gone, they're all gone. Robert Carr keeps Sun Venture tours running. He's a magician. You'll have to ask him what magic wand he uses. Jamaica tourism, guys, has nothing to do with ecotourism. It's sea, sun, sand. And I was told not to say sex, so I'm not going to put sex, I just put yes, right? But that's what Jamaica tourism is about. It's not about rustic tourism. It's not about meeting, not about community interaction. No, you're locked away behind the closed doors and you're not supposed to interact with the communities. But ecotourism, by its very definition, involves interaction with the communities. A survey done years ago, many tourists thought, well, they went up Dunn's River and that was an ecotourism experience, believe it or not. But we are sun, sea, sand tourism. And this poster from the 1970s is still the hottest poster out there. And I like this one. I couldn't resist this one. We had a wonderful program here called We Are More Than a Beach, We Are a Country. If you're my age, you'll remember it. This is from the 70s and the 80s. If you're around in the 80s, remember it. And it's a wonderful slogan, isn't it, guys? We are more than a beach, we are a country. But look at the hot poster. That was the hot poster. Look down bottom there. What does the writing says? We are more than a beach, we're a country. That's how we advertise ourselves being, right? So Jamaica tourism is, this is Jamaica tourism. And the new slogan now, we're the heartbeat of the world. And look at there are no people except there are no local people on this poster. And this is one that we're using right now. The one that's pushed by the present minister. How could Rio Grande get hold of some tourism money? Butterfly tourism might work. Butterfly farming might work. Using common butterflies, not homerus. And we need to continue the research work. Butterfly tourism is big enough, guys. These are tours being advertised. What you see here are tours being advertised. It's big. It's next to bird tourism. What's Jamaica potential? Let's line it up. Tom Emmel said to me, when I take tours to Brazil, I take them to Rondonia, and you step out of your cottage and there are 150 species of butterflies in the field in front of you. Jamaica's got 130 or something like that. These guys are talking about, 1,000, 1,500, 1,600 species in 1 little square kilometer. So we have limited butterfly tourism to offer. However, homerus is a big draw. Except persons go to Brazil and Papua New Guinea and places like that, and when they finish, when they go down their checklist, they finally say, homerus, let's go and get it. We need some careful niche marketing and some careful packaging of the experience. And there have been some butterfly tourists come trickling through. These guys came all the way from Japan. These guys, one from Italy, one from England. This guy from Japan. I mean, he is a president of the Murata Manufacturing Company. If you have a cell phone, bet part of Mr. Murata's, something from his factory is in your cell phone. And he came to Jamaica to look for Homerus, but he came after he had written many, many books on his travels around the world. Oh, by the way, if you want to go, there's a new guest house in Rio Grande Valley. If you want to go looking for and to see Homerus, I thought I'll just sneak this one in, right? So, suppose we do some butterfly farming or ranching or rearing. What's the big difference? Ranching, you actually grow them in the wild. You can put up put up greenhouses. You can just grow butterfly food in your farm, and they would come and lay eggs, and you can then use that to give you larvae, etc., etc. Or you can rear them in shade houses, and you don't need Homerus for this. You can have butterfly houses, really a big, nice garden in which you release thousands of butterflies every day, and people come and pay for that. Butterflies sit and drink your sweat. And we've been trying out this. This is from 2005. We did this detailed drawings and everything for butterfly house. That fell through. Butterfly, if you rear butterflies, you have butterfly releases, and there's at least one group doing this now in Jamaica. People like butterflies for their weddings. You can do butterfly craft. I mean, these are stuff I pulled off my office, really. This is a nice one. The wings are butterfly, the body is paper, and the antennae are from, I don't know, pig hair or something like that. But it's nice. The female figure here is made from butterfly wings. And, people like butterflies, guys. People like butterflies. And there's a big trade for the private collectors. Like how people collect stamps, the people collect butterflies. Big, big. And here's a someone who just pledged 8,000, 850,000 butterflies to the University of Florida from his private collection. And the big sales of butterflies around the world. Papua New Guinea, you rear your butterflies, you take it to the government farming agency, and these were sold by the government farming agency. Homerus might not get into these things that we just showed you. I just showed you, but if we ever get to rear it, it can fetch premium price on premium tourism. Probably should go into captive reign of Homerus. We can then release some adults back to the environment. But that needs more research because we want to make sure we not just send them back to a sink. You can have special attractions certain times of the year in butterfly houses. And you could regulate the trade. Okay? Guys, Homerus is big. I've just pulled 2 books down off my shelf here. Threatening Swallowtail Butterflies. What's there, Homerus? Butterflies and Moths. This is a global pocket drive. What's pocket guide? What's in the front page? Big and bold? Homerus. Homerus is big. I've kept you for a long time, so let me finish up. We've come a long way from the days when Homerus was unknown. When the butterfly men with nets could roam the forest openly, there's no legislation. There's no protected areas. We have come a long, long way. But the cockpit country is in danger of shrinking. And the eastern communities need our help. We must continue the research. And final comments. We have demonstrated that community conservation is a viable option. And final statement. Environmentalists must get up off of their chairs and begin to understand that development is part of conservation. We hear it all the time. Whenever a place is going to be being bulldozed, we say, oh no, don't bulldoze it. We can do ecotourism there. And then we go home. We don't put the ecotourism there. We simply go home. Because we have said ecotourism is an alternative, that means it will automatically appear. Guys, if you're serious, if we are serious as environmentalists, we got to begin to think in terms of development. And I give the last word to Humorous. Battered, bruised, but still in the game. That's it. Hope you learned something, and I'm looking forward for the discussions. Okay, guys? Over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. G. That was really, really a very interesting presentation. I must admit that when you started going through the myths, I said to myself, I thought that was true. So it really was quite a journey that you took us on. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to open the floor now for persons to type their questions in the chat. I've allowed persons to be able to unmute their mics, but I'm still going to ask that we go by raise hands as much as possible. Samir, I think you had your hand up earlier. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, it was a mistake, but I decided to say thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. And I'm praying for some development, some money going into it.
Thanks.
So I don't have a question. Great presentation, thanks.
Thank you, Sam. What's happening in the chat?
And anyone else? Janelle is monitoring the chat for me. Anyone with comments, questions? This is a discussion section, everyone. This is your opportunity. I can't be the only one that found out some really interesting things today.
I have a question. Can you
Go
hear
ahead,
me?
Amar. Yes,
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 got
we
you.
can.
Yes, actually, it was just this week I saw some people in one of those developed countries, artificial intelligence experts, and I was looking at something not relating to environment or wildlife. And as I explored their site, they actually featured a project looking at wildlife preservation and how machine learning can aid that in terms of, establishing the database and some of the issues that Dr. Gary touched on in terms of the movement of the population and just getting a better understanding of what is happening, because machine learning comes in when you have large data sets. Anything involving a lot of data, machine learning can assist you, in understanding that data. So I just want to know if Dr. Gary has anything to say about that.
I don't know if I quite grasp exactly what you're asking of me. Give me a bit more to chew on. I don't know if I quite grasp it. Right.
For instance, you were talking about not actually being sure what was affecting the population.
You
had several issues.
Yes.
Also understanding the movement of the butterflies. Like if you go to one particular block at a certain point in time to be empty, but if you were to go to another block, you might see a lot of butterflies there. So I know you're not a technologist, but it's just something maybe a lot of people don't know about this, but it's good for people to know that artificial intelligence experts, people who work with computers, the environmentalists are like in a different field altogether, and actually the fields are being combined in that people who are familiar with computer technology, artificial intelligence, they're actually working with environmentalists to better understand what is happening with wildlife and how to preserve it.
Okay, I follow you. Yes, we have thought about it. And some years ago, we started working with a Swiss company. For just one example of what we did. We've tried many different things. We started working with a Swiss company to actually tag butterflies. This company had actually created tiny transmitters that you can sew into your clothes when you went skiing. So that if you got covered up under the snow, we can actually find you. And these are tiny things which you can sew into your knapsack, into your, the seams of your pants, etc. And we started working with them towards miniaturizing these things. We can actually put them on butterflies. And there were some experiments using them on monarch butterflies. And then we started looking at how we can use them for home errors. Because we thought if we can just get some data as to the flight patterns and how the butterfly moves, then we could start running models and all sorts, running all kind of wonderful models. But first we needed some data. We ran into one problem in that the terrain in which the butterfly operates is often very difficult terrains. This cockpit country is dips and hillocks, and the Rio Grande is valleys after valleys, and we didn't find a way to overcome it. We could do it if it's a flat plane coming across the prairies or something, but we hadn't yet worked out how to get this little transmitter to beam up to the sky and beam it back down to us, because they're so tiny things. But yes, we have been looking into things like this. And trying to try to put meters of all different description across the landscape so we can collect data on all sorts of different factors. Yes, we have tried. We run into problems with a thing called finances in a little way. But we are aware of it and we have tried some. Thanks. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, and in addition to being a question, it's just an issue that I wanted people to be aware of, that technology is now being employed to solve some of these problems in a way that we couldn't before.
Okay, thank you very much, Omar. We have another hand raised, David Smith, and then I'm going to ask Janelle. I see several comments and questions in the chat. So I'm going to ask David to go ahead.
Thanks very much. Question, Eric. Thanks for a great talk and walking us back through memory lane. You mentioned the part about sustainable development. How do you get people who are really maybe only interested in animals or plants to be also interested in sustainable development? And how can we do this at the university to get our biology students interested in development issues as well?
Well, David, why didn't you ask me something that I could answer? For many years, we have been educated in little blocks. The scientist in his little world, and the person in economics in his own little world, and to some extent, that's how we've been educated. We at UWI tried various things. One of the big steps was, first and foremost, was to make it easier for persons to go across faculties by simply equalizing the fees. The school fees were different in different faculties. We managed to get that equalized, so therefore you can take a course in any faculty without any additional cost. So we started trying to get students to do different things. Biology students doing accounting, biology students doing econ. We had biology students doing mass comm, because we thought the communication section of scientists were relatively weak. So we tried various combinations, and we have managed not as successful as I would like, but there has been some students who have actually managed to straddle both worlds. It hasn't been easy. To be frank, it turned out to be a bit more difficult than I expected. But that's one of the things which we tried. We thought We need to get our students exposed beyond the science into the arts, into communications, into the social sciences. That's one thing which we can actually do much better with. But the thoughts have been with us for a long time, and we have tried various combinations. Given with COVID, there's a completely new paradigm where lots of things are now online and not face to face. Because we had timetabling issues, etc. Now things are online and recorded, etc. It might open up a very different scenario for students wanting to cross the divide. Don't know how you see it. Any ideas from you?
I see your point. I keep thinking that maybe in the same way that we used to have everybody had to do use of English or Caribbean history or what have you, that maybe a university looking for the next thing will have everybody look at some aspect of sustainable development. But maybe that's too much. But maybe, yeah, the communication thing might be able to work. But I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and it does bother me that a lot of the rhetoric we see isn't tied to how you answer the real question of, if we don't mine, or if we don't cut down, or if we don't do this, what are we going to do in order to send our children to school? We, I think, as a set of people involved or interested in conservation, have done a very bad job of answering that extremely important question. It's also interesting, I think, the dynamics that exist in the Rio Grande Valley and how distinct they seem to be from the dynamics that exist in many of the communities in and around the cockpit country. And it's interesting because I think things may have been different had cockpit country been declared a national park back in the 90s, same time. And the communities would have been more involved in actually managing their own space. And unfortunately, that did not take place. So what we're seeing now is still very much a lot of the conservation messages that get out there are messages of thou shalt not, rather than how can you do this and make sure that the animals, plants, and people are all working together sustainably, and we haven't done a good job of that.
You put it mildly. We haven't done any job at it. We have
Well,
done,
okay, yes. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else have any ideas on this. It's not something which we talk about a lot as conservationists. We do talk a lot. We get together and we have wonderful workshops about plants and animals, but we don't have workshops about development. You know, just think of it. Have any of us, how many of us have actually gone to a workshop in this country, a biology conservationist workshop, or an environmentalist workshop, depends on how you want to see yourself, where we sit down and ask ourselves questions about development? Although we coined the term, I have never been invited to one. Has anyone been invited to one? I don't think so.
Resounding silence, Dr. G.
Yeah. And the thing about it, and it's a sad thing, you know, we keep building people's hopes. We keep saying, okay, let's not mine. We can make more money from ecotourism. And once the backhoe backs off and there's no mining, we all go home and clap ourselves and beat our chest. So we have done a great job, done a good job, my foot. We haven't done anything. We have only gone step one. The game, the battle, the war, you know, a war is about number of battles. You got to win the battles to win. You might not win every battle, but you got to keep on till you win the war. And we win a battle and we think we have won the war. You know, and we keep doing it. And I look at it on television ever so often and my head aches with it.
I'm sure many of us are feeling the same way on many other issues that really concentrate on how we treat sustainable development in this country. We have some questions and comments in the chat. Dr. G, many persons saying excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, we have many persons saying that interesting and very informative. Did dispel some of the myths that some persons had. We have a question from Erica. Are there identifiable leaders in the Eastern community who, given the funding, would produce what is desired?
The East suffers from massive migration. And let me tell you this one. A student of geography was doing some research on farming while we were in the Rio Grande back in the 1990s. And there's a graduate student, and she woke me up one night late, and she was panicking. She had to go back to the Rio Grande because there's a major problem with her data. She was seeing something like, I think it was, I can't remember the exact figure, like 8 or 10 men within a certain age range. I think between, I think it was like 12 or 15 to about age 35, 40, like 8 or 10 males to every female. No, that has to be wrong. You know, how could you have 10 men or even 5 men? It doesn't matter. But once it's 8 or 9 or 10 men to every female. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, because she couldn't sleep, and I had to get up, and we drove back to the Rio Grande. And she hit the road, and within an hour or two, she was back. She says the date is correct. By the time the girls get to age 9, 10, 11, 12, they're shipped off to Auntie Lorian in Kingston with the hope that they have a better life. Or to Uncle David. And the boys are left behind. And a lot of these girls go on and get educated, but why would they go back? And the boys who happen to get educated anyway, they want to leave as quick as they can, because what are you going to do? It hurts a lot. I mean, I once had some visitors. They stayed at the Grande Station for a number of weeks, and one person said to me, I reckon if I were to ask the average school child here what you want to do when you grow up, you probably say, when I grow up, I want to watch the road. That was painful. That's painful. So to answer your question about the leaders, leaders are produced. Enough leaders are produced. I know many persons who are holding very distinguished positions from the Rio Grande, people from the Rio Grande, who are holding very distinguished positions in this country. But why would they go back? What's on the offering to go back? Lynette Wilkes was, for example, one of the leaders and who made a huge difference. But Lynette went back after she retired. Her impact was huge as a leader, but she went back when she retired. And so I don't know if I've helped to answer that question. I've gone a long route, and I've taken you right along the mulberry bush and the mango tree, but I hope you get the picture of what's happening.
Thanks, Dr. G. So on that note, I'll take this comment. It says, thank you so much for a great talk covering so many issues at every level of the problem. Then we have a question from Damani. When is the trip to see the homeless? I'm going to piggyback on that one.
I don't know. We have talked about it. Part of the problem is that with COVID, normally we carpool. With COVID, carpooling became much more difficult. and the roads are not, from Port Antonio inland, the roads get a little kind of rough for an ordinary car. If you don't mind, yes, you can drive it, and ordinary cars do make it, but it does get a little rough. And that's the two big problems, really. How do I get persons? It almost become limited to persons who willing to drive and persons who can get someone who willing to trust their COVID status in order to visit the valley. It's hurtful because I don't want to eliminate, I don't want to leave persons behind because you're not driving, and it's a bit painful.
But Dr. G, it's a bit of a circular rhetoric then, isn't it? Because the same reasons you've mentioned would be the same reason. I'm saying it's a bit of circular rhetoric because the same reasons you've mentioned why these communities have been left by themselves, the same reason you don't have good roads to be able to take persons who would be interested to try to work and encourage support and funding. So we really seem to be caught in a cycle.
Yes, we are. We are.
Erica said, yes, I get the picture, but it is very depressing. Who then will do all the wonderful work that you've described?
We probably can do more than we think. I'll give you an example. I wrote a project for a breadfruit economic. Oh, let me put it so I want to put it properly. A breadfruit project. You know, it's an economically viable project that's meant to be. That's meant to be a commercially. That's what I'm looking for. A commercially viable project. That's how it was presented. We had funding. Everything looked good, and then we ran into a rather strange stumbling block, and it didn't happen. Just when we thought everything was going to happen, it's run into a stumbling block. But as an individual, I might, if I got that project to work, I, as an individual, would have made a difference. As an individual, by taking up my pen and writing a project, of course, in conjunction with people, I can't write a project for people without the people. You know, but I got the idea and I sat down with the locals and we worked the project out and we put it together and we got funded. But we ran into a rather stupid problem. But I'm saying this because we often think we can't make a difference as individuals. We often think we can't make a difference as a group, you know, like an NGO. We often don't we think we can't make a difference. Guys, we can. First, you have to believe you can. You have to want to do it. And as I said, for example, many of us have expertise in writing projects. How many persons in the Upper Rio Grande can write a project for one of these big organizations? That's one very simple example to show that we can make a difference if we decide it is something we want to do.
Thanks for that, Dr. G. We have two persons with their hands raised, Ian Gage and then Ann Sutton. Ann, did you take your hand down? After Ian, if you still have a question, please go ahead. Ian?
Hi, good evening.
Hi, Ian.
Hey, well, you know, every time I see you, I ask you about the butterfly. So I'm really happy for this presentation. It was very informative, but I also want to speak to that issue of the sustainable development, because I think a lot of times in the debate of sustainable development, we go on to the two poles, and we believe that sustainable development can occur without economic development. So we say we can't just focus on the bottom line and so on. But the truth is, a program, as you see here, that is dependent upon funding from somebody and a project from somewhere is actually not sustainable. And we have seen projects that we have done that when you go into communities and you train up the people in the community in very short order, that education that they were missing makes them employable elsewhere and they disappear from the community. So I think that part of the conservation answer is to not just focus on the thing itself, but what as a different complete economic activity could happen in that valley, in that area. That is what would then allow you to add on. Because as you are saying, we when you're competing with the Brazilian scenario of the 1,500 species in that small area versus 130 total, you in that kind of small butterfly world, we are not attractive. But we may be attractive for something else in that area. That is what you do. And the butterfly is an additional thing to that. And that is what provides the economic base that you can now continuously go ahead and do the conservation work. Because as this describes, you get some funding back in the 80s, you get some funding in the 90s, and then the things die. So I think that it's to look at it from a perspective of saying, what can we do in that area of the Blue Mountains that is actually a sustainable business? And then make it attractive. Sorry to tell you, I'm not a believer in community enterprises, because unless there is an economic value to somebody and somebody is going to make a profit and an income and a salary from something, it lasts for time, and then when those people get tired and get frustrated by nobody else helping, it collapses. And we've seen this time and again. It feels good to start up these programs. I think they themselves are not sustainable. So we have to create something that in fact becomes an economic value to somebody, and part of that economic value is the sustenance of the butterfly population. That's just my humble opinion.
And you, Ian, have said a number of really important things. Very often we dream up wonderful projects, very often from outside, without really understanding the dynamics of the communities we're working with, and that's a common issue. And I emphasize the importance of being embedded in order to understand the dynamics of how things operate. And the projects that have happened in many of these communities, like the ones I mentioned here, they come and go. They're never really sustainable. None of these are actually sustainable. The one I dreamt up, I thought it might have made it. We're going to plant, endless acres of breadfruit, and someone's promised us a group that call themselves Trees That Feed, which, if you haven't heard of them, it might be worthwhile looking at them. Started by a Jamaican couple we met in the physics lab here at UWI. Started a thing called Trees That Feed organization, now international. And they would do things like, in this case, we would plant breadfruit. And once we have planted breadfruit, they would supply us with the seedlings, actually. They would pay for the seedlings, etc. We carry the breadfruit. And then once that's done, they would walk in with what they call a factory in a box and put this factory down, and then they will teach you how to process breadfruit into various things, teach you how to market, and hold your hand for a number of years while you go through this process. And in theory, this breadfruit project is supposed to own money, so the community should earn money at different levels, from taking care of the breadfruit to selling the breadfruit products and so on. That's the kind of thing which I had in mind. And the idea was that it should bring monies in to people. Some people are going to make monies and make a livelihood much better than they were doing now. Of course, there are leadership issues and so on, which one have to consider, when it gets down to the bones. But you might actually have to bring people in. You might actually have to bring an accountant in. You might actually have to bring a marketing person in to do these things because of the limited capabilities. But I hear you loud and clear. Projects need to be grounded on an economically sound basis. They have to be commercially viable. Otherwise, they wouldn't last. They would run the life of the finances, and then the finances stop and everything crashes. And we have lots of examples of that. We're not short of these examples, really. So I hear you loud and clear, Ian. And I'm back to one thing. I mean, Ian and I have talked so much about a trip. Probably we should think of small trips rather than having the whole society. Probably we should think of, trips of 10 persons and another 10 and another 10 and nibble at it, different groups going at different times. Ian, probably we should think about that. So you really get the chance. I've been promised you for how long now? I don't know. It's been a long time.
I will definitely think on
Yeah,
that.
follow us up on that. Okay. And I see Anne hand is still up. Right?
Yes, Anne's hand is up. Anne, please go ahead.
Thank you, Eric, for a really inspiring and encouraging, as well as challenging presentation. And I think you're very right to say that as conservationists, we need to be looking at.
Anne, your audio went just now.
It's Anne, not me. Okay.
Yeah, it's Anne. If you're hearing us, could you try again? We're not hearing you, Anne. Not sure what's going on. We can see that you're speaking, but we can't hear you. I think something went wrong with your microphone.
Could you type it?
Yeah, could you type it in the chat? I think she's typing, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, she says it's a bit much to type.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
yeah.
we're gone, and she'll work at it meanwhile.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a few more comments in the meantime in the chat. Damani said the funds to support persons in the community will probably have to come from outside the community. This is what you've mentioned, Dr. G, that they've had to seek. Many of these projects or programs actually constantly require input from outside, which really does not make it sustainable. We have Tracy says, good evening, informative and thought-provoking presentation. I think they tried to make Butterfly Man. He ran off. Accommodation and tours. Hopefully we can all knock heads and try again after COVID-19 to make it sustainable. I have a question, Dr. G. You mentioned about ecotourism and that very few of these initiatives seem to work in Jamaica. However, I found that where tourism is concerned on the South Coast, you find that it's a very different sort of tourism product. And many persons in communities actually benefit from foreign exchange that comes in for many different offerings, and communities actually work together to seek funding to build that sort of community branding. Treasure Beach is one such area. How can we use those sorts of examples and try to to take the lessons and put them towards good use in these other areas on the inside of the island and on the eastern end of the island?
I don't know the details of Treasure Beach, but I seem to remember what's the name of the individual who started who really spearheaded, given a name, who spearheaded that Treasure Beach development. It's a well-known name. Just
Hensley?
Yes. You know, so you need someone who believes in it and who drives it and who is willing to weather the storm for a time. It wasn't easy in the beginning. I remember him talking about it. It wasn't easy in the beginning. He literally, you know, someone had to believe in it, because he actually had to carve out a niche in the middle of sand, sea, and sex. You know, he had to carve out a little niche there, and it need belief. It needs people who believe in something and who got what it takes to be able to survive long enough to carve out that niche. It doesn't start easily, and once it gets to a certain point, it takes off. But to get it to that point, you need to have enough backative to survive that long.
Because in the end, you really need investment, and
yes,
and you have to be willing to take some licks along the way, but it takes cash.
It takes cash to start it up, and you have to have the backative to stand out there. Year one, you don't make a cent. Year two, you don't make a cent, and you got to be, you got to be willing to do your advertisements, because the general advertisements ignore you. The tourism advertisement don't cater for you. You know,
I also noticed that funding in those areas too. You did mention that you need persons grounded within the communities, because you can't get funding for them, give it to them, and then walk away. You have to have someone who's invested in the community itself in order to get these things to work, which goes back to what you had mentioned and what Ian said. And the truth is, sustainable development is not just about the natural environment. You have the social aspect and you have the financial aspect. That is really what sustainable development is about. It's not just about preservation of the natural environment. It really is bigger than that, because sustainability really is about human beings utilizing the natural environment, because at the end of the day, it really is about human survival. And we can't really miss that point when we think of how we write our proposals and what it is we want to achieve. It can't be just about saving a species for the sake of saving a species. There is some of that, but for a small island like us, I think we have to look at the bigger picture. And so Erica makes the point here, okay, so everybody agrees, but do we have any viable ideas, something that we can all get behind to actually make something happen? Because we talk and talk and talk and talk, but at the end of the day, what can each of us here actually do?
And probably we have discussed, Norian, the idea of having probably discussion sessions where people meet and bounce ideas about different things. Probably this might be a sort of topic we could, for the first time, actually bounce around, just have a loose bounce around of ideas one evening. You know, people can sit down with their drink, whether you want to drink mint tea or red stripe or whatever you want to.
That NHSJ liming session that we're supposed to plan. Yes.
Yeah, and bounce around ideas of, you know, listen, we are all new to this. None of us, or I shouldn't say that, but most of us here are not into this business development in a big way. And it might be a good thing for us just to talk about it, so that it begins to get into our heads and begin to get ideas. So probably we should, you know, sit in one evening and just talk about it. We mightn't change the world, but it might get into our heads and we start thinking about it. Okay. I don't know if Anne can try again.
Anne?
She's still mute,
I
you know.
mean, can you
Right.
hear me now?
Yes, Anne, yes, you're here. Go ahead.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Several things. I mean, I think I totally support what Eric was saying about conservationists need to be more engaged in sustainable development. But it's a big challenge. I mean, I think we also need to ask the other question, right? How do we engage the business community and mainstream sustainable development, get investors to invest in these communities, right? It's really a big challenge for to ask, you know, the communities or anybody to develop new business ideas in a hostile environment. I mean, when I say hostile, when we talk about these sorts of things, like CCAM in Portland Bight is really trying to engage communities in sustainable development. It's been doing that for 30 years. But I mean, things like trying to set up an ecotourism facility, like the Portland Bight Discovery Center. I mean, you would not believe how difficult it is for an NGO with funding to set up a fully licensed ecotourism attraction. I mean, it's probably been 2 years to try and get the permits, and you need this permit and that permit and something else, and train people, and then, you know, it's I would say for a community and even for an NGO, it's almost impossible to set up something at a community level. So the actual environment is hostile in terms of the enabling environment and regulations. You know, so I think that's I mean, not to say that it's impossible or that we shouldn't all try, because we should, but just to say that we do need more support. And I think we need more recognition that conservation is not going to ultimately be self-financing in many cases, you know. And I think we need just to consider that, you know, that businesses are best run by business people. And we can come up with the ideas, but we need the business community to take those ideas and help us to develop them. I think the other thing I wanted to say was I heard the comment that like in terms of mining, that we need to develop alternative when we think about mining, we say don't cut down the forest, but then we don't come with viable options for the communities, you know, after we've prevented mining or whatever. The bottom line is the communities do not benefit from mining. The people who benefit from mining are the middle-class people in Kingston, and mining in any area results in disastrous poverty. And I think we should do a field trip to South Manchester to look at what mining does to communities, you know. So I think that particular bit of an argument is a false argument. So, you know, we need to I mean, we're looking at what can happen in the cockpit country. Like, if you look in the long term, development of sustainable farming in the areas which are going to be mined is going to benefit communities much more than mining, you know. But you've got the short term and long term values. So lots of, I think there's a lot of fundamental questions that we need to address, and it's complicated.
Okay, thanks, Anne. And yes, it is complicated, and that's why we need to work with it. I remember when we had that forum on the trails in the Blue Mountains, the new trails which we're hoping to establish in the Blue Mountains. And we had a gentleman from tourism sector, government sector, and he was talking about there's a new ecotourism policy or something coming. I remember Robert Carr saying, don't talk to him about that. That would be probably the 15th time of hearing such a thing coming. Simply, the successive administrations have not paid any attention to this part of it. And therefore, the policies and all of the legislation doesn't take into account the kind of organizations that will be involved in ecotourism. And the structure, the funding that available for tourism is not tailored in this direction. It's all tailored towards the big all inclusives. And that's a real problem, because we continue to get lip service from the administrations, various administrations saying, yes, until you try to do it, you suddenly realize, really and truly, you don't exist on the calendar. You don't exist on, as far as these government systems are concerned. It's just a nice term to usually band about, to make it look like just another thing to band about. And that's a problem. And yes, businesses got to be run by business people, but you have to bring in the end, you need business people to run it. But environmentalists need to get involved more and more in trying to get the business involved. And in terms of like saying, let's not mind, and then going home and leave the people behind. One of the problems is that the people often get a feeling that we are making them a promise. That's the problem. In that you listen to let's take the discussions about mining the cockpit country, and you listen to a lot of the forum, and I've gone to many different EIs and so on. The people get the feeling, or the people really believe, that they are promised an alternative, and that's part of the problem. In that it's a promise that doesn't happen. We know mining is not going to benefit them, but the thing about it, if we, the conservationists, make a promise for something better and we don't deliver something, it doesn't go down well. And that's part of the thing which I am struggling with, how to deal with this. I listen to some of the promises that have been made in some meetings, and you wonder what in heaven's going on here. Because it can't happen. Or if it can happen, we're not willing to really do it. We're just talking about it. And we just need to be careful of our promises. Or if we're going to promise, we got to do something about the promises. And it's a real issue. I've cockpit country, Rio Grande Valley, I can give you, if I start talking now about promises that were just flown out there, we will be here till tomorrow morning.
The other promises don't work either. The promise that bauxite mining is going to benefit anybody in any rural communities is, well, apart from Mandeville, I guess. But so those promises don't pay. I think the problem that we have is that, as you rightly pointed out, rural communities are marginalized and not considered, in any, to be important in any way. And how do we ameliorate their conditions? How do we provide them with roads? I think these are, issues that are just not considered. And the question of how we fund protected areas, how we support the ranger stations that you need in Rio Grande to support activities, to even support the sustainable development. That requires investment. It's not just going to come from projects. It requires the government recognizing that's an important area of investment.
And that is the sort of challenge we need to talk about. How do we get there? I don't know how, but how do I get a prime minister to see this as, how come I see how does a prime minister see this as a way to get votes? Which is really what the question comes down to.
Yeah.
If they don't see votes, they count votes.
Right.
And how do we, because it's a real challenge to us. We can't not look at it. It's just too important not to. Not that I have an answer. I don't know where to begin some of these answers. But it's real. And what worries me is that we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's the part that really worries me. It's not part of our agenda. And
Well, Dr. G, you made a good point earlier that the way that we are educated really places us in silos. And if it is that we pick a subject area to specialize in, what is the purpose? What is the aim? If it is not for human development, which cannot happen in isolation in any one subject area, then what's the point? Because that really has to be the end goal for whatever it is we're doing. And an ecologist can't do it by themselves or himself, herself. An economist can't do it alone. You can't have any particular expert doing this by themselves. It really is going to take collaboration. But I think it also means that conservationists, ecologists, environmentalists, we also need to understand that we need to be seen as more than just tree huggers. We need to be seen as people who are serious about real sustainable development and willing to engage the other experts to seek advice and help and support from them as well. And understand that in order for them to be invested in what it is we want to achieve, they also have to be able to get some returns. And we really have to realize that we need to stop operating in isolation, and we need to look at the issues as they really are and not as how we would like them to be. We have some more comments here in the chat. Ian Gage says, for example, Reggae Falls for years sitting there. Now a biggish attraction and community members make money from the attraction. They can be guided into conservation in that area because there is an income. Erica says in Discovery Bay, we are planning warden tours by canoe with viewing boxes or glass bottom canoes if we can afford them, that the fishermen will operate in between fishing. We have to get them created wardens. We have to look at insurance and safety, etc. But it is viable and it is doable. So it seems that perhaps not with Comoros, but there are persons making strides in other areas, and perhaps we can work together to learn from other people's experiences to see how we can tackle some of the bigger issues that we have.
And if I may say, and the little pieces matter, you know, because the more little pieces we have, eventually the bucket would tip. You know, so you got to lick something in you know, SICAM has got something, and Discovery Bay got something, and we all add it up. We, you know, and eventually the bucket would tip, and someone would wake up one morning and say, "Hey, guess what? You know, there's something happening over here." So it all matters. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. Once it's there, it adds. And it's important that we talk to each other. So SICAM needs to talk to Discovery Bay and talk to the guys in Fish Sanctuary yonder. So we all are sharing each other and butting heads, and you know, probably it's happening and I don't know, right? Because a lot of circles, I'm not necessarily part of many circles, but you know, I get invited to many meetings to deal with animals and plants, but I don't get invited to meetings where we're knocking our heads together and SICAM saying, "Hey, I got this fantastic building, I can't get it." And somebody other then say, "Guess what? I know how to push over the minister because I just pushed him down last week." Probably it's happening, but whenever I get invited, it's about animals and plants and, you know, and reefs and
perhaps we need to plan a session where we invite persons, tailor it to persons from other subject areas, from other fields, and put some of these ideas to them and get their feedback, what they think about it.
Yeah, because we all trying. I mean, you know, Steer in Albert Tongue, they've been at it for a long time. Goodness, they have stuck it out for a long time, and they're still in it. You know, SICAM's still in it, and okay, and we all of us. But I can't remember the last time I had a really good discussion with Hugh Dixon about what's going on in his neck of the woods. You know, from that point of view, that is, you know, we talk about various things, but we haven't sat down and talked about his experience and how did he manage? And then somebody say, ah, yes, I got an idea from that. And we don't talk about this. We don't have meetings to deal with that.
Well, Dr. G, I think this is a good starting point or a good pivot for us, for the persons who have joined us here this evening. I'm going to take one final comment, one final question, and then we're going to wrap up. So is there anyone else who would like to raise their hand or make a final comment in the chat?
I see Jill up one time. I can't remember. I think I saw Jill hand.
Jill made a post in the chat. She said, brilliant and thought-provoking. Thank you, Dr. Garraway.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Well,
I think you have given us so much to digest. Such profound information, questions. It really is quite a bit, Dr. G. You've opened a can of worms tonight, I think. So, okay, there's a final comment question from Janelle. A ridge to reef tourism product that could couple Alligator Head Foundation in East Portland Fish Sanctuary and Ambassador would be a cool idea, question mark. Not sure about logistics, but synergy between both entities has good tourism potential. So Dr. G, the discussion continues. I'm sure that when we leave here, persons will still be speaking about it, will still be bouncing ideas, and perhaps the NHSJ can think about creating a discussion space for this particular topic going forward, not just about humorous, but how do we move from just trying to be conservationists to persons who are engaged actively in sustainable development. Thank you so much.
Can I just have one last word?
Yes, guys, absolutely.
I knew I went on long. I knew it was going to be long, but I said to myself, I hope you guys had a good dinner because, you know, I said, well, okay, I'm probably the oldest guy in this town. I have some prerogative. I must apologize. I knew I went on longer than a normal presentation, but I hope you survived. All right, I hope you survived. It's longer than normal, but I hope you survived.
And more than half the participants actually stuck it out to the very end. So it really goes to show the impact that what you have been putting forward has had, not just in the presentation, but what you've discussed and opened up for us. Thank you so much for that. Dr. G, thank you so very much for your presentation. Participants, thank you so very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. The Natural History Society is trying to do thought-provoking presentations such as this at least once a month. We are also looking to, as much as possible, though we have the COVID-19 restrictions, to try to do a few field trips in between. So we want to encourage you, pay attention to our social media pages. If you're on our WhatsApp, please do become a member. We encourage you to join the society. And I am going to ask our president, Omar Cheddar, if he has anything to say to us before we close off for the evening.
Just to thank everyone for participating, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next webinar, and have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you very much. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Take care and stay safe.